Hi, my name's Richard Houghton, and you're listening to Two Guys Talking Rush.
Two guys talking rush. Two guys talking rush. Two guys talking rush. Two guys talking rush. Two guys.
And now, get ready for the Two Guys Talking Rush podcast with your hosts, John Kane and Dan Buxton. So in the UK, you would actually get thrown in jail if you were caught with marijuana. I mean, was it stricter?
Yeah, and obviously it's still illegal in this country now. I mean, you probably get away with a police caution now, but unlike the US where it's been decriminalised, it's still technically an offence to be caught in possession of cannabis. And depending on the colour of your skin, depending on the local police force, you could have a lot of hassle for it and could end up, certainly going to court and getting a fine for possession.
That's not like totally different from how it is here, because some states it's legal.
Illegal, or illegal.
I live in Brooklyn, part of New York City. And technically it's not legal here, but nobody does anything about it. And so it's de facto legal here. Then there are other states where there are mandatory minimum sentences of 20 years if they catch you with one joint. So it really depends where you are. But I don't know. I don't know. It sounds like in some ways the situation is kind of the same. The tailgate party, however, I can tell you is 100% an American phenomenon, and I'm not in any way surprised to hear from you that it does not exist anywhere else. That makes total sense to me.
The pregame
show. Yeah, exactly.
Totally. Yeah.
Plus, you guys in some states can drive at the age of 16.
Right.
Whereas in England, you had to be 17, and having a car at the age of 17 or 18 was quite unusual. I mean, I had a car at 17, but out of a class of 30 kids, only 2 of us had cars. Lots of kids might have a small motorbike or what we call a moped, which would be a 50cc engine thing, which would maybe do 35, 40 miles an hour. But, you had a lot of friends suddenly when you had a car, because you could drive people to shows, you could take people out to pubs and all that kind of thing, which my impression is that teenagers in the US have more ready access to vehicles just because it's a bigger country and actually you can't live without a car. But in England, you can more walk to places.
You also mentioned that the Rush would be playing smaller venues in England rather than the big arenas here. And at a time when they might have been huge in the US, they were going to England and actually playing smaller venues. Is that what you were alluding?
Yeah, because the arenas didn't exist back in the late 70s.
Right.
There are a couple of stories in the book about a place called New Bingley Hall in Stafford in England. And they played that venue on the Permanent Waves tour. And that at the time was the biggest indoor venue in the UK apart from the Wembley Arena. And it was an old cattle shed. It's where they used to have cattle auctions. And people in the book talk about going there and actually being able to smell the cow manure. Because 2 days before, they'd have been selling cattle in there, and suddenly the roadies come in and start setting up the stage for a show.
I think I would give up the joints and the tailgating to go see a smaller venue to see Rush.
I would too, actually.
I could throw that other stuff away. So you specialize in these books. It seems like the foundation of this inspiration is because you are a fan yourself. It's not you're just not churning out books just for the hell of churning out books. You're a fan of music, and you've kind of found this niche in taking kind of examining these oral histories and cataloging them. And thank you for that, because otherwise these memories would be lost, right? So that's good stuff. I did a little research. You have books or recent books on Prince, Queen, The Faces, Cream and Neil Young. Are these upcoming books, or they've already been released?
The Prince book I actually edited. My sister, who's a big Prince fan, wrote that with her friend. So I just did the polishing there. That they actually went out and got the stories. So
cool.
The publisher publicised it as my book, but actually that's doing my sister and a pal a real disservice because they did a lot of legwork there. And the other bands you've mentioned, The Faces, Cream, and Neil and Queen are all forthcoming topics. Hopefully next year, but it kind of depends on how many hours there are in a day sometimes. But I think with the exception of Neil, what they've all got in common, and the same is true of Rush, is they are bands that are no longer performing. I don't think of the Queen, Adam Lambert thing as Queen at all. To me, that's a totally different band.
Yep.
And actually, there's a story in the Rush book where somebody says to me, I was a really big Queen fan up until A Night at the Opera and Bohemian Rhapsody. And they sold their soul to the devil when they made that album, and they stopped being a good band. So
I'm getting upset. I'm getting very upset to hear that. I love that. I love them. I even take issue with your characterization of what they're doing now as not Queen. Although I get it. I understand. But no, that's funny. I mean, most people feel like that, Night at the Opera that's when it really happened. That's when they came into their own and really became Queen.
I think I love Brian May than more than I love Queen. I mean, I love Mercury's command of the audience. I mean, just what an incredible frontman, But
yeah. Brian May is a fucking beast.
He is, man.
That's pardon my French.
No, it's okay.
And no, I mean, yeah, that's yes, 100%.
But you mentioned
I'm a big Queen fan too. I respect Brian May for the fact that he's still out there performing at the age of 70 or whatever.
Yeah.
Good luck to these guys. You can't lock people in a box just because they got to a certain age.
Right.
But you mentioned commonalities. That was my next question. Is okay. So you've written these books. You've taken these oral histories. They're fan-based books. Of course, the content, or I should say, the music is different somewhat. So what are the commonalities? We'll get into the Rush stuff in a bit. But what are the commonalities of a fan base based on each band? Can you make connections? Are these, what types of people are these?
Well, I researched these books, as I said, in relation to the Stones book. I wrote out to local newspapers, particularly in England, but also in the US. And so people are contacting me saying, I saw your letter in the newspaper. I want to tell you my story. My story is I met Mick Jagger around the back of the Empire Theatre in Liverpool in 1965, or whatever it might be. So the people have got a story to tell, but sometimes they're telling a story about meeting the band or what they remember of the show, or how they weren't allowed to go to the show because their folks wouldn't let them out, or they were worried they were going to miss school the next day. And sometimes they're just talking about themselves and how seeing a band really changed their life. And that is certainly a big theme in the Rush book. People who, when they discovered Rush and Rush's music, it was a light bulb moment for them, and life was never the same again, because they'd heard a song, they'd read a lyric that they'd never realised a band could write, and that's what was different for them. And I think that's a common theme. The people who tell these stories are passionate about the band that they've bothered to sit down at a keyboard and bash out an email to me about, or post me a letter about, and want to tell that story.
So as a writer, what is your process? Are you writing like 20,000 word introductions? Do you have introductions to each chapter? I haven't seen I don't have a copy of the Rush book yet, but how do you approach the research in the writing for a book like this? Not just with Rush, but with any of these topics. What's your approach?
Okay, so the Rush book is at the print as we speak, so I'll get a copy to you just as soon as I get a copy myself.
Thank you.
Now, what I try to do is very much tell it in the fans' own words. So the preamble to the book will be as short as possible, and then it's a case of talking about letting the fans tell me the history. Because sometimes people will say, well, you've heard that story about The Who, for example. Let me tell you, this is what really happened. So they tell you the received wisdom about the band and then give you their take on it. And it might be a classic performance on TV, or it might be a drug bust, or it might be the reaction from the critics when the first album came out. So they want to tell you what they've read. And what I wanted to do, and hopefully I've done this with all the books, is avoid just a cut and paste job from previous books that have been written about an act. Because if somebody's already told the story, you know, what's the point in telling it again? You know, again, somebody reads a lot of books. I really hate buying a book about a band and thinking, I'm sure I've read this before. And then when you look at another book about the same act, you realise actually that this latest book is just a rehash of stuff that's been written before. There's no new interviewees. They're quoting from the same press reviews or the same articles that the other book wrote about. And what you want, and what I thought I was going to get, and I think I have got, is fans telling it as they remember it.
Do you have a quota of oral histories? Do you say, all right, I need 250 interviews to make up a book of a certain word count? I mean, how many interviews do you know let me rephrase. What's the quota of interviews that's going to fulfill a book at your expectations? Yeah,
something around 350 to 400 stories is good. Some people will give you maybe 1,500 words. Some people will give you maybe 200 words. And it's mixing the shorter stories with the longer stories that helps with the book, really make it more readable. You know, I'm not going to pretend I'm going to win the Pulitzer Prize for Rush the day I was there, or indeed any of the other books. It's more of somebody called them toilet books, but I take that in a good way, because it's a book you can pick up, you can read for a few minutes, you can put it down again, then you can pick it up again and carry on reading, or go to a different section of the book and read something about it.
I am the author of no less than 5 toilet books. So to me, that's actually, you're using them as directed if you're reading them on the toilet. So
yeah.
I don't consider that a bad thing at all.
My books,
I think it's a catch.
My books are not toilet books. I'm not gonna. And no offense to toilet books, but I spent 10 years on one book, and if I caught somebody reading on the toilet, I would smack them in the head, you know. But or if I found it in someone's bathroom, I would be deeply offended. So no, I think it's the opposite. I think Rush is such a significant band. I mean, all these bands are significant to someone or to a fan base. That's what makes them so huge. And because the show is about Rush, and we talk to so many Rush fans, and we have so many different people that were involved with Rush on so many varying levels, significant varying levels, we know firsthand how important the relationship is between the fan and the music, especially with Rush. That's why we have a podcast about Rush we felt was worthy enough to kind of examine and expand on, and this is our 19th episode that you're on now. We started this thing, and I think we knew in our hearts that it was something that had worth. And I think your book is the same. I don't see, what if we had 350 Rush fans and we had 350 episodes? I mean, that's, each one has their own individual story, and
they do.
Yeah, totally, man. And that's not a toilet book. That's bullshit. But with your writing and actually, oral histories are important. I think we've gotten away from cataloging oral histories in writing. People just kind of rely on the internet. They rely on articles and say, oh, there it is, but doing the legwork, I mean, that's a lot of work, man. 350 interviews. I did 150 or 175 for my book, and that was a lot of work. Transcribing them, kind of picking up the meaningful content, arranging it, absorbing it into the text. I mean, good for you. And I imagine you're doing as many for the remainder of your books. But what's really interesting to me is that you are a fan yourself of Rush. You're not just you're not just in the factory churning out books because you can make a quick buck on this topic. It's a niche topic, but you're still a fan, So going back to you as a fan, what did Rush mean? As if I was the oral historian and I was writing a book of oral histories, why was Rush important to you as a fan? Beyond the writing, before the book writing.
Well, again, it's something that few people in the book talk about, which is that the lyrics were just something different to everything else. I mean, you know, I love Deep Purple, I love Ian Gillan.
Same here.
But the lyrics to Speed King, for example, don't stand up to a lot of analysis.
Right.
Maybe Smoke on the Water stands up to a little more analysis, but it's because there is a story there, but it's not great poetry, really.
Space trucking. I think that's got some poetry to it.
Smoke on the Water is an oral history, if you want to think of it that way. You know, it's a 5-minute oral history of one thing, but yeah.
But you listen to the trees, and you know,
Something
you really
different.
Yeah.
No, there's no comparison. There's no comparison at all. No, to this day, I haven't heard anybody with those kinds of lyrics ever. You know, exactly. There is no one else like that. If you want that kind of thing, you must go to Rush. There is nowhere
It's like,
else.
you know, the Deep Purple were like meat and potatoes. Rush were like filet mignon. You know, we're going to go for a better cut of meat, I think.
Yeah.
But both have significance. Both are fulfilling in their own way, you know. But so with you as a fan, the lyrics were important to you when you first heard those tunes on your record player or wherever you listened to them. They encapsulated you, right? You were drawn in as a fan. So
yeah, well, like I said, I met this guy at college. He was a huge fan. I mean, what was interesting about this guy, you know, we're not in touch anymore, but we were friends for 30 plus years. He's actually from an Asian background, so he grew up in northern England from a strict Muslim background where his folks didn't approve of him listening to music, didn't approve of him doing anything that didn't involve going to mosque and studying the Quran and being a good boy and, you know, being respectful to his mum and dad. One of his white school friends introduced him to Rush, and he managed to persuade his mother, his devout mother, to embroider the Starman on the back of his denim jacket. And she copied the design off the album, never having heard Rush, not really understanding what the hell she was doing. But, you know, he loved his mum because she agreed to do that jacket for him.
That's sweet.
And, yeah.
it's awesome.
It is, yeah.
And then he lost the jacket. About 5 years later, he was driving somewhere. The guy stopped at the service station on the motorway. It was hot. He took his jacket off, put it on the roof of the car. They got back in the car, started driving off again. Then he remembered the jacket was on the roof. So they drove.
Brutal.
They pulled off at the next jump, drove back down the motorway, back to the gas station, but the jacket was gone.
Oh, bummer.
So we can only assume that some other Rush fan saw the jacket and thought,
we hope.
I hope that's what happened. Yeah, exactly.
So did you see many tours? Did you go to many tours?
You know, I only saw Rush once. I saw Rush on Friday, 30th of October, 1981, at that cattle shed I was talking about. I think they were actually in the UK at the time, recording at Rockfield Studios. So they may have actually been recording Moving Pictures album, if my memory serves me right.
Interesting. So the stories of the fan, you know, and we were kind of talking about merchandise, right? T-shirts, albums, someone making a Rush jacket. Did you ever come across a fan that had a huge collection of Rush ephemera or Rush items?
Oh yeah, there are several of them in the book. I mean, loads of people sent me stories and sent me photographs as well, and I couldn't use all of the images I got because at the end of the day, there's only so many copies of the cover of 2112 that you can put in a book before people's eyes start to glaze over.
Sure.
But there's some of that, you know, there's that kind of stuff, you know, the people with the personalised license plates, there's the people who've got homemade T-shirts, there are people who've got nodding doll, bobbleheads, nodding heads we call them in the UK.
Mm.
And yeah, and you know, and all that kind of stuff, you know, and then you get the people who've seen them. You know, I saw them once. My friend I've been talking about actually saw them twice in London on successive nights, because he went the first night to the Hammersmith Odeon, and then they went back the next night with the same tickets, covered the date of with their thumb when they went past the security guard. Of course, this was the day before barcodes and your tickets being scanned.
Yeah, that's a
and
nice
they got all the way into the venue, and so they saw 2 nights in a row with one ticket.
Wow! Out of all the fans that you recorded oral histories, was there one fan that just saw them like 200 times? I mean, what was the most a fan had seen Rush? Because I know that's a lot of Rush fans pride themselves and had seen the band a lot.
Yeah, I think there's somebody who saw them 168 times.
Wow,
that sounds about right.
It's incredible.
Yeah.
Wow.
You know, people are saying, "Oh God, I only saw them 50 times."
Right.
And I know a lot of people saw them more. You know, 50 times is still pretty good.
That's a lot. That's a lot.
North American shows, because that's not 50 times in the Northeast United States. That's going to Vegas. It's going out to LA. It's traveling all around. So I think that's one of the things that really struck me is the dedication associated with following a band around, particularly if you're having to pay for tickets on top. So if you're not on the guest list or you're not getting a backstage pass, you're maybe shelling out $50 or $60 for a ticket, but you've got your hotel, you've got your transport, maybe you're having to take time off work. You know, it's a lot of money to invest in following a band around.
There's a lot of physical toil in it all. You know, I mean, I've spoken to like quite a few fans too who are like, so I went to San Mateo. That was only 12 hours drive away. So I went right after work, saw the show, came back, no sleep, went to work, then drove 12 hours south to San Antonio. They talk about like, just all this abuse, like physical abuse that they subjected themselves to, but they never seem to mind at all, and I mean, if anything, they're just like, Rush show, I'm going, and we'll figure out later how we're going to do this. We'll figure out the logistics some other time. And if you're talking about like a 72 or 96 hour period with no sleep whatsoever, all driving, they don't seem to mind. And there are family members I would not drive 12 hours to see, so, that's, I admire, it's not just dedication though. That's love. That's beyond just, I really like this band, because there are a lot of bands I would not do that for, who I listen to all the time. They're just, how did you approach these people? Like, what was your approach to it, to get the stories? Did you just kind of put out a call somehow, or?
I did that on a couple of sites. I'm a member of a few Facebook groups. So like there's an old Detroit concert page. There's a similar one for San Francisco. There's one for Boston. So I posted on a few sites like that, asking people to get in touch. But also I'm a member of quite a few Rush Facebook groups. So if somebody posted saying, I was at such and such a show, I'd send them a message. And the way Facebook works is if you send a message to a complete stranger, it goes to a weird inbox. So the person doesn't necessarily see it if you're not already a friend of theirs on Facebook. So sometimes people would respond and sometimes they wouldn't, or they wouldn't respond until weeks or months later and say, I've just come across your message and I'd love to share my story. So a little bit of me stalking people on Facebook, which might seem a bit creepy, but obviously if people don't want to share, they don't get back in touch, or they get back in touch and then they think better of it, decide they don't want to talk to you about it. But that's how I did it. So quite a lot of late nights, looking at stories, sending people messages, and then arranging to talk to them, or them emailing me with a story if they decided they'd rather do it that way.
Right. This kind of relates back to my question about commonalities in these fan oral histories. How does the Rush fan differ than all of these other oral histories that you've ever taken? What's the difference in a Rush fan than other fans of music?
I think it's just the reverence with which they hold the band in, because I was talking to a female fan just before the book went to print, and she said women love these guys because they're regular guys, they were faithful to their wives, they weren't big party animals, they came out, they played great music, and then they went home to their families and they would just want to be left alone to do that. And that just seemed to be that it's a love for the band, that everybody seems to have, that they were good guys who always gave the best on stage, always played every show like it might be their last, because they wanted to give the fans every last penny's worth on stage. But they were not about, there was no egos there. It was about the music. It was about the experience. It was about making a concert great. It was, you know, you had the effects, you had the lights, you had the videos, you had the pyro. Everything was about giving the fans the best possible experience. And yet, musically, they were a tight outfit. They respected each other. They worked together as a unit, you know, and they were a closed shop in one sense. They weren't in all the trashy magazines. They weren't inviting Hello magazine in to look at their sofa, or talking to the kind of magazines that even people like Stones, you know, I'm a big fan of Stones, but, you know, Mick and Keith will sell their souls to get more PR for the new album because they play the game as they have done for 50-something years.
Sure.
Rush just didn't play that game, and I think that's what the fans loved about them, on top of the great music, on top of the fantastic lyrics. And people become fans and then stayed with the band. Maybe some people drifted away in the 80s when the more keyboard influenced music came along, but that, again, it was a recurring theme in the book. People said, I kind of parted company after Signals, and then I came back and realised that, you know, maybe those albums that they hadn't listened to in the 90s weren't so bad afterwards.
Right.
And they rejoined the band on the Vapor Trails tour. They rejoined the band after that, and, you know, now at the end of their career, wanted to cram in as many shows as possible because they knew that the guys couldn't go on forever, and actually they loved this music, loved those albums, and wanted to get as much of that live experience as they could.
If there was any data to be pulled from your books, specifically your Rush book, as it relates to, let's say, the best album, the one album everybody says they love, what would be that album based on your analysis?
Do you know, that's a really good question, because I don't think one album jumps out. Everybody seems to have a different favourite. You know, there are people who love Roll the Bones. There's a lot of people who love 2112, but some of that is about the whole fact that they've grown up with that album. There's a lot of love for Clockwork Angels. You know, people say, what a great album
that out too.
to go out on. You know, it's very hard to say this. I mean, maybe one or two albums like Presto are less, you know, score less highly because people don't talk about that one quite as much. But
what about an era of Rush? So we have the 70s, we have the 80s, we have the 90s and 2000s. Based on, I guess maybe that would be relevant to the age group that you're talking to. There's the classic rock 70s older hippies that love that kind of went with the 2112, and maybe they got lost after the 80s stuff. But was there an era of Rush that people loved more, or was that just mainly based on their age category?
No, I think you're right. I think maybe 2112 through to Moving Pictures and Signals is a golden era in the eyes of lots of people. But then there are some people who just think that Fly By Night and Caress of Steel were great albums, and they never topped those. So that feels very much to me like an age-driven thing. You know, if you were 16 or 17 in 1974, you were hearing that kind of stuff for the first time. It made such an impression on you. But I think you're right. It's sometimes it's just about how old you are when that new album comes out. Because if you're 15 or 16 when a band's new album comes out and it's fresh to everybody, it makes a bigger impression on you than it does if you're 40 or 50 maybe.
Yeah, well, we've talked to fans that got into Rush late because maybe a parent introduced them to Rush, and then that album that kind of hit them in the special way, let's say Power Windows, that was their introduction, so they moved backward in time with Rush, right? They discover the Rush discography backwards. They go backwards in time. We had a show, and we're going to have another show in the spring as a series, the women of Rush, because that has been a huge misconception about women being at Rush shows. You know, there's always been a running joke that Rush is a very male-dominated audience and of a certain age group and all this sort of thing. However, we've kind of broken those myths. I think Dan would agree on that, because there are females that love the band. So how many women did you interview out of the 300 and something fans that you
There's probably 30 or 40 women in the book.
Okay, that's good.
Yeah, and you know, sometimes they're women who were introduced to the band by their husband, by their boyfriend, but they've gone on to be fans in their own right. You know, maybe they've lost the husband or the boyfriend along the way,
Sure.
but they're still fans, you know, and very proud of it. It's, again, going back to the British experience, the kind of people who went to Rush gigs in the UK in the late 70s were typically guys who rode a motorbike or wish they owned a motorbike.
Sure.
So they'd be wearing a leather jacket. They'd have the denim cut off over the jacket. They'd have maybe a few studs. So they wouldn't be Hells Angels, because we never really had proper Hells Angels in the UK, not like you get in the US. But people who, you know, the junior Hells Angels maybe, and people who were into bikes, into drinking, into drugs, into guitar bands. And you wouldn't see women at those British concerts unless their boyfriend or husband was a biker, in which case they'd be biker chicks. But increasingly that's changed, and the point you touched on before is, you know, as people have got older, they've taken their kids to shows, and there's quite a few stories in the book about dads taking the kids, introducing their sons, introducing their daughters to Rush, and that whole generational thing where I guess, you know, there's even a few grandchildren in there. There's one lady from Canada who took her 3-year-old grandson to a Rush gig, and all the people sat around about saying, "Why have you taken your grandson to this concert?" And the kid loved it. He had a great time. He had the earplugs in, but he loved it, loved the whole thing, and he had a great time. At the end of the show, everybody was saying, "Brilliant."
I took my 10-year-old to like a couple of rock concerts, and the way that it was received, like when my wife and I came in with him, like, you know, like there were all these like kind of rough looking guys, like the kind you were talking about. They're all like, "Yeah, all right." You know, they really saw it as like, good, you're passing the torch. This is necessary. And, you know, Rush specifically, I have already demonstrated, I think, that they really have the ability to easily transcend generations. You know, I think part of that just comes down to how unique they are. There is nothing else that sounds like that, and it's fresh to everyone who hears it for the first time. And it doesn't matter if you're 70 or 10. It's like, wait, oh my God, what the hell is that? You know, there are very few bands who have the ability to shock you in that way the first time you hear them. So, you know, I think that's a lot of why they've been able, you know, even now that they're not active anymore, they've been able to just keep it going. People just want to keep hearing it. Because you have to go there. There is nowhere else to hear stuff like that.
You know, one question I had for you, and I'm not sure when you ended your research or your capturing of these oral histories, was it post Neil Peart passing, or were you capturing oral histories well past the passing of Neil? And if so, what can you talk about how the passing of Neil Peart affected some of the people that you interviewed?
I started researching the book before Neil passed, and not that long before, actually, maybe about 6 months before. So when the news came through, I actually stopped work on the book because I thought it didn't feel right, and I didn't want to be seen to be taking advantage of the situation. You know, I mean, I was shocked, and everybody I spoke to afterwards was shocked. It seemed very, very few people knew that Neil was sick. And I talked to one or two people who said they knew something about it beforehand, but everybody else, it was a shock. And they either heard it direct on the radio, or somebody rang them up or texted them and said, "Have you heard the news?" Yeah, and there's some really touching stories in the book of people just maybe having to pull over by the side of the road to compose themselves because they couldn't believe what they'd heard. Or, having about in the garden, drink a large glass of whiskey and just, get their head around it. Lots of tears shed. Lots of people still saying they couldn't come to terms with it. Still haven't come to terms with it. Still can't believe it's happened. Can't believe that Rush will never perform again, because they were holding out hope of some kind of residency or a couple of festival appearances or something that the guys would, even if they weren't going to go out on the road again full time, might do a few one-off shows that they could see them perform again. So still people coming to terms with what had happened. So that's actually quite a big theme in the book. And I had to be careful really, because I didn't want it to be just about Neil and for people to be mournful and sad about what had happened, because it's meant to be a celebration of Rush and a celebration of the excitement and the thrill of a concert, and people are able to express their love of Rush. But inevitably, because of when I did some of the interviews, some of them were only a few weeks after Neil had passed, people talked about that quite a lot. And I did think about parking the book and just abandoning it altogether. But a few people, when I said that to them, said, no, you should do it. Not doing it would be the wrong thing now, because people are going to want to remember Rush. And the fact that Neil has passed is actually a trigger for some people to want to remember their shows they attended and talk about their experiences, and you should carry on with it. So that's what I've done. And like I said, maybe because of when it's coming out, there's a bit more about Neil and how people feel about Neil and the whole ending of the band than there may have been if I'd done the book in maybe a couple of years' time. But I just thought people are saying do it, so I'm going to do it.
Do you think, going back to the data to be pulled from this book, if we were to assess, certain questions, in particular, one about who was the most impactful member or who was the most meaningful member of the band to the fan, was there one member of Rush that made the biggest impression on a fan that came up a lot? I mean, it might be kind of a ridiculous question, but I'm just curious. Maybe, Alex comes up a lot. I just love Alex's playing. He was an inspiration, or even Geddy in the same respect. Or was it Neil because he was so profound in his playing and his articulation, both verbally and his just prowess behind the drums? What was it? Who was that one member that just came up a lot in your assessment?
Well, I don't know if it was just sheer statistical luck.
Yeah.
But I seem to interview a lot of people who play a musical instrument.
Yeah.
And of those people who play a musical instrument, a hell of a lot of them seem to be drummers. And seriously, I mean, there must be 40 or 50 people in this book who straight off the bat say, I want to put it on record, I'm a drummer and I was inspired by Neil. So it's clearly somebody who a lot of fans have got a lot. They either became a drummer because of Neil, or they were already a drummer and Neil inspired them to try and do better things and to carry on playing the drums and keep at it. So yeah, there are people who say that Alex is the best guitarist ever, or they really admire the way he plays. A lot of people love the way Alex goofs around on stage and pulls faces at the crowd, pulls faces at security, etc. Sure. And clearly enjoys being on stage and loves performing. And, there are people who love the way Geddy plays. There's 2 or 3 stories in the book about kids who picked up the bass guitar because of Geddy and, really want to be as good as Geddy and just think he's somebody to aspire to in terms of the way he plays. But no, Neil wins that contest hands down.
Can you share any memorable stories, 1 or 2 out of the book that just stay with you, ones you'll never forget?
Well, there's one in particular that I remember where a guy decided he was working away from home, so he knew he wasn't going to get to see the band near where he lived, somewhere out on the West Coast. And he figured, because of work, that he could actually get to a show that was a day's drive away. And he actually rode his motorcycle for 25 hours non-stop. He didn't stop to sleep. And he drove for 25 hours to get to the show. And he said at one point, somebody waved him over. He'd fallen asleep on his motorbike whilst he was riding. And a fellow motorcyclist sort of flagged him down and said, "Hey man, you're going to crash." So he got off the bike, slapped himself around the face a few times, got on the bike, drove to the gig, went to the box office. He only had $100 on him, so he was going to buy a ticket, and if he had any spare change, he was going to buy a beer and he was going to buy a hot dog, but he only had $100 on him. And they said, "Oh, yeah, you can have a ticket. It's going to cost you $35. And then somebody in the back of the ticket office said, "What about the other ticket?" And he said, "What's the other ticket?" And they said, "Oh, we've got one other ticket, but it's $93. He said, "I'll take it." So he spent his $93 on this other ticket, which meant he wouldn't have enough money for food and beer. Got into the venue, walks up, went down the centre aisle, showed his ticket to security, they waved him forward. He went to the next security, they waved him forward. And he ended up right on the front row. And he said, "I almost died going to that concert and I ended up on the front row. That was the most fantastic experience of my life. And actually somebody gave me money for beer and food as well, so that was even better."
There you go.
That's a good one. We're going to have him on the show. That's incredible. Well, we should probably, at some point when we get your book, maybe we could, with your permission, read some of the stories. Maybe read one or two, share a paragraph or something for an episode, just as a little piece. I mean, I think that would be.
Yeah, we'll get people on the show and get them to tell their stories again.
I think that would be really special. Yeah, totally. So we always ask folks who are Rush fans if you could give us your top 5 Rush albums and kind of categorize them from your least to the number 1, but 5. Can you do that for us? Do you have?
Sure.
Okay.
Well, it's tough because I'm a fan of those golden era albums, and it's really difficult.
That's why we have 5. So we want to hear that it's tough. We're making it difficult for you, man.
There are no wrong answers.
No, and the list changes. If we were to ask you next week, your list would probably change. But right now, what are your top 5 Rush albums?
Okay, well, I'm going to put Permanent Waves in there. I guess that's number 5.
Okay.
And obviously that's a fantastic album in its own right. And I'm going to cheat on this as well. Well, maybe it's not cheating, I don't know. 2112, which, was the first album that my friend introduced me to, because obviously that was his album. That was the whole Starman thing on his jacket. The Moving Pictures. And this is where the cheating comes in. Exit Stage Left and All the World's a Stage.
Wow, so you're jamming in a bunch of
Oh, did you think you were cheating because you chose live albums?
We should probably say excluding live albums, but that's okay.
Exit Stage Left, to me, is one of the best things they ever did. And there are definitive versions, in my opinion, at least, of a couple of their songs on that album. But no, I mean, usually when you get asked these things, they want just studio albums. But, I mean, so much of what was great about them was their ability to flawlessly execute the sound of those studio albums live with even a little something extra. That's not a small thing. And, I mean, yeah, there are a lot of bands where the live album is like, oh man, we have a contract to fulfill, just put out a live album. They were never like that. Every live album is justified in being there, and in some cases were slight improvements on the studio counterparts, in my opinion, at least. So no, to me that's not cheating at all. That's to me that means you've done your homework.
All right, you're
a good Rush fan.
Let me rephrase the question.
I could have put Exit Stage Left as my number 1 actually, because that album, and I've never done this for a record before or since, for any record by any band, is my local record store had a display in the window saying that the album was coming out that Friday. And I got out of bed early and I went down to the record store that day. So I was there when the doors opened to buy my copy of Exit Stage Left.
Yeah. You hear that, folks? So, people used to get out of bed early to go get an album.
Exactly, yeah. They used to go do things in places.
Who does that for a download? And nobody does that for a download. No, nobody wakes up early for a download.
Not the same.
Buying tickets. Same with buying tickets. You know?
Right.
And again, it's a theme in the book.
Yes.
People saying, you know, I queued up overnight for my rush ticket. Who does that now? You know, you get on the website 2 minutes before or 20 minutes or an hour before the site goes live. Kids today are missing out on that whole experience of being in line for tickets.
I remember, I still have my ticket stub. I stood in line for hours at the Boston Garden because I'm, from Boston, to see Ronnie James Dio, and I just stood in that line forever. I got there early, and I was number whatever, and I got right up there, and I knew what it was before scalping really just kind of changed the landscape of and monopolized, especially in the U.S. It's kind of like we accept these scalping outfits that have just grown enormously, that dominate and monopolize the ticket industry. But yeah, I miss those days, actually. Going back to our, we were talking about the dedication of a fan. I remember when Black Sabbath did the reunion tour, 1999, and they were doing these, Tower Records would host these signings. I stood in line, I think like 18 hours to meet Black Sabbath. I mean, I was I think I like hurt my knees. I like still hurt, and I was a young guy, that was a long time to wait for a band of any, but it was Sabbath. I mean, I had to do it, it was like no brainer. I think I would have done the same for Rush. If they had done a signing, I would have stood in line probably even longer, fans will do anything to see their favorite artist, big time.
Yeah, I queued up overnight for Genesis tickets.
Oh, wow.
In Leicester in England.
Oh.
And then decided not to go to the show. So having queued up overnight for the tickets, I then sold them to a friend. So I didn't scalp them. I sold them at face value.
Yeah.
But what I really hate about scalping is, if Ticketmaster or somebody else wants to resell the tickets at twice or three times the value through these semi-official sites,
yeah,
so be it. But that money should go to the band.
I know.
Shouldn't be going to Ticketmaster or
And
Seatwave or these other people.
We could do a whole separate show on how that whole situation is and what's wrong with that whole business model and who is, poorly served by it and that sort of thing. But that's that's another 2 hours.
Yeah, and also
a lot of angry ranting.
I know, so. And it excludes fans, that can't otherwise afford it, and also too, it's so greedy, and we have you have probably have Craigslist in the UK. I imagine you must have Craigslist there. When I guess where there's that option to look for people selling tickets. Mostly in the US, it's scalpers reselling tickets on Craigslist. And I remember I saw Paul McCartney at Fenway Park. It was probably one of the best shows I had ever seen. And it was kind of a bucket list thing to see a Beatle, and it was just a fabulous performance. But his tickets in the beginning were exorbitantly high. I mean, they were hundreds and hundreds, $500, to get even somewhere in the vicinity. Last minute, $50, some scalper. He's like, he couldn't get rid of them. I'm like, all right. But I'm thinking like, wow, what a waste of time, like you're just trying to hustle everybody to get, and finally you just ended up selling it to somebody for a modest $50, So yeah, maybe that'll, with COVID and how COVID is affecting the live event landscape, maybe that'll kind of fix or readjust the scalping problem that we have, hopefully, where these bigger venues are kind of getting squashed and, the bigger artists are kind of, I don't know, maybe even aging out and things are getting a little less, popular in that way, So who knows? I don't know, but I can't thank you enough for being on the show, Richard.
Well, thank you for getting in touch with us, because the reason you're on the show in the first place is because you responded to us after hearing the podcast through our website. And we were like, oh, great. Okay. And I believe you're in fact the first guest we have who got in touch with us. So thank you, really. And it's been a pleasure to have you, and thank you for your time, and stay in touch. Okay. And hopefully something will happen.
Okay, can I just plug the book a little bit more then?
Totally. Yeah. My next question for you was, where can folks learn more about what you do, and what are your upcoming projects?
Okay. Okay, so the book that we've been talking about tonight is Rush the Day I Was There. It's published by a company called This Day in Music Books.com. It will be available on Amazon. Amazon isn't great for authors because they shave the price down, but it does mean it's available anywhere in the world, or certainly anywhere in the US or North America if people want to buy it there. And although the book is finished, I'd still love to hear from any other Rush fans who wanted to get in touch and share their memories. I'd love to do a volume 2 if the interest was there, if people wanted to share their stories with me. I'm very conscious of the fact that there's around 400 stories in the book, and yet Rush sold 15 million tickets in the course of their career. So there are many thousands of Rush fans whose stories I haven't captured, and it'd be great to hear some more of those. So if people wanted to get in touch, my email address is iwasthatgig@gmail.com. And in terms of other projects, I'm working on a book about the Faces with Rod Stewart. I'm working on a book about the Cream. I'm working on a book about Queen. So if there are any Queen fans, I know there's at least one because we've talked to him tonight, then I'd love to hear from him. I saw Queen 4 times.
Yeah.
And always put on a great show.
Wow.
So,
with Mercury?
With Mercury, yeah.
Wow.
First time I saw them was Hyde Park in London, which was a free show they did.
Wow.
Then I saw them at Earl's Court in London, which is around 17,000 capacity arena. Wembley Arena.
Was that in 77 when you saw them at Earl's Court?
Yeah.
I have a bootleg of that gig.
Right, yeah.
Best version of 39 I've ever heard in my life.
Then I saw them at Wembley Arena, which is around half the size of Earl's Court. And then the last time I saw them was on the Crazy Tour when they played the Rainbow Theatre in London, which is about 3,500 capacity. So every time I saw them was in a smaller venue.
That's amazing.
Huh.
So if we'd have kept going, they'd have ended up playing in my front room, I guess. So,
have you ever seen Zeppelin, Richard?
I did. I saw them once in Nebworth in England in 1979.
Wow.
Which again was an outdoor show. 130,000 people, I think, were in the crowd that day. But they made you feel like they were playing a small club. It was such a fantastic atmosphere.
That performance gets panned by a lot of critics. Page wasn't really playing at his best. He looked very thin, I remember, in that. And remember how thin he looked in those? And of course, Bonham was sort of on his way out. He wasn't playing as well, but the songs are good. I mean, they play some wonderful tracks on that, and Plant is and his famed polka dotted shirt, and at least hopefully I'm getting the right show.
Yeah, no, I think you are. And what I remember about that is they did 2 encores, and the crowd wouldn't leave. And it was out in the field in the summer, and there wasn't lots of floodlighting, but they were trying to get the crowd to go home. The crowd would not disperse. Then after 10 minutes, the band came back out, and Robert Plant said, half off mic, fuck off home. And then
I love it. I love it.
Wow.
Well, there's a version of Achilles' Last Stand on that. That's wonderful. I love that version of Achilles' Last Stand. Well, this is great, and I want to invite you back on. Maybe we could do something. Maybe you can come on with a few fans, and we can do a live thing with interviewing and just
I
sharing
would love
stories.
that.
Yeah, come up with an idea, pitch us the idea, and we have an open door, an open Zoom window here for you. Thank you very much, Richard, for joining us on Two Guys Talking Rush. Best of luck with the book.
Yeah, thank you
very much indeed. Look, great to talk to you both.
Great to talk to you as well.
Stay safe.
You as well. Well, that was a great interview.
Yeah, that was a lot of fun. It's good to talk to a fellow writer and man of letters and oral historian and that sort of thing. John and I both met because we both written books about Woodstock, and both of our books featured interviews with concert attendees, and you can't get that. That's an insight you just can't get any other way, and all the stories are so unique and so individual, and you will always get a lot of people reading them and going like, I didn't know that.
Totally. And what's great about talking to Richard was he has his book is like a data bank.
Yes.
I look at it like if you were to do, search words, if you would incorporate that whole thing into an active Excel spreadsheet, and you were to pull out search words, Neil Peart, 2112, this tour, that tour, merchant, anything that dealt with specifics of Rush, that's good data. And I think, and I don't like to break things down, and I don't say data in a inhumane, kind of a boring mathematical way,
right.
but these are things that we're trying to cover in a show and to segment in a show. So, any one of those topics that a Rush fan would talk about, we could actually apply to a show theme or whatever. Rush, fans in Rush merchandise, fans in that almost made it to a show. How many shows a fan went? But he is the keeper of that data.
Right.
He did the legwork. We haven't done that legwork. So he's the ambassador of the fan to me.
That's not a small thing. I mean, for my Woodstock book, like we were talking about it, once I started getting these people's stories down, I'm sure it's the same for him too. I had this feeling of like, this is really important because these are unsung, not famous people, but they went all this effort. They took the time to go and do this thing because it meant something to them. And I'm happy that, these people in the Rush fans and that sort of thing are going to have those stories preserved because it matters. It's not just like that they just went out for an evening of entertainment. This means something to them. It's deeply felt. And, we're not all going to be here forever, but the stories of what we did, those live on. And so I think it's important.
It totally is important. And, Richard talking about how someone called his book a toilet book, that bothers me, it's like really just not, this is the anti-intellectual assessment or criticism on a book of oral histories. Just because it's not this enormous body of research that he spent 20 years working on about Rush and all this analysis, this critical analysis, and all that. It doesn't matter. I mean, his book is an important component to the legacy of the band as it relates to the fan and the significance. So yes, I think it's really, I think he's underestimating the work that he did with all the other bands as well, but because this is a Rush focused show, I think he's underestimating the significance of an effort of putting a book that's just focused on band or fan oral histories as it relates to Rush. Because, like you said, if he didn't do it, who's going to do it? He did it. It's in the book. The memories live on. It's cataloged, and now we have something to look back on and say, wow. 50 years, 100 years, someone will look back like, whoa, this band was really, really important to these individuals, and I hope he does a volume 2. I think it's worth that, most definitely.
It matters. As far as I'm concerned, this stuff matters. And I'm glad it's getting documented, and I'm glad it's being put out there. That's very important, and I'm glad to see it happening.
Well, I was going to ask him when his next book on Esteban would be coming out, oral histories on Esteban,
Well, that'll be the next show.
Hopefully there's people out there that know what I'm talking about when I say Esteban. I was always enamored by his long fingernails and how he looked like Zorro.
You may be doing a slightly niche-y reference there, possibly. I don't want to, come down hard on you about that, but maybe not everyone will know who that is.
I almost referenced Two Guys Talking Air Supply, but I know there's Air Supply fans out there like you.
Yes, there are. Yeah. Yes, exactly. That's right. Here I am, the one that you love. Exactly.
Every doctor's office I've ever been in. Well, folks, there it is. Another milestone episode of your favorite podcast, the motherlode of all podcasts, Two Guys Talking Rush. My name's John Kane.
I am the delightful Dan Buckspan.
And thank you for listening in to Two Guys Talking Rush. What can I say, folks? Rush rules.
Two guys are talking, Rush. 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 Two guys.
Live music inspires millions around the world, but the concerts we all enjoy wouldn't be possible without the countless crew members working behind the scenes. As COVID-19 puts concerts on pause, we want to extend a helping hand to the touring and venue crews who depend on shows to make a living. Crew Nation was created to do just that. Crew members are the backbone of the live music industry, and we hope you'll join us in supporting them through this temporary intermission until we can once again unite millions around the world through the power of live music. Crew Nation is powered by Music Forward Foundation, a charitable 501c3 organization that will be administering the fund. Live Nation has committed $10 million to Crew Nation, contributing an initial $5 million to the fund, then matching the next $5 million given by artists, fans, and employees dollar for dollar. Please support Crew Nation at www.livenationentertainment.com/Crew Nation.